Hi, I'm Wild Bill. And like a Brazilian wax, I'm about to address a very sensitive issue. And I'm kind of happy to do so. I've been trying to get this together for a few years now because I have an idea of a specific part of history that is substantially at variance with the official narrative. What's an official narrative? Well, an official narrative is how your country came to be the best country there is, and your people are the happiest that anyone could be. That's what an official narrative is. Or that your people are the eternal victim and everybody else is to blame and you deserve a free ride. There are a couple ways to it. But generally it's that you are the chosen people, you are the deserving ones, you are the first world, and everyone else is a little less, maybe barbarians, maybe subhumans. Don't know why you'd mate with them, but there you go. People got shaky morals. So we have a narrative as well. So do the British. So does Australia. So does Germany. Germany's narrative after World War I was we were stabbed in the back. That the army was still good to go, but the doggone politicians back home stabbed us in the back and declared peace. Now that is at variance with the truth of the matter, which every historian knows. Ludendorff was begging the Kaiser to surrender. The Kaiser didn't want to surrender, so the military did want to surrender more than the civilians did. Get it straight, you guys. Live in the real world. I hate doing it. So when I'm forced to, I want to drag other people down with me. Misery loves company. So, but there's a national narrative in Germany that we did nothing wrong. Somehow this was all forced upon us. We were forced to invade Belgium twice. We were forced to invade Russia twice. We were forced to destroy the area called Poland twice. I don't sense a pattern. I'm merely pointing out to you that the Germans have a national narrative that shows why that was all very important stuff, and the things that they should be sorry for, they're sorry for, and the things that they don't think they should be sorry for, they are still proud of. That's what a national narrative does. It gives the people something to rally around. But it's scarcely true. We have a narrative about World War II. There's a piece of it that I don't like because I don't think it's possible. And so I'd like to try to straighten that out here. The thing that I want to object to is the part of our narrative, the Allied narrative, about the invasion of Japan. This is what my whole discourse today is about. The predicted invasion of Japan. The narrative says that we were forced to drop the A-bombs on those recalcitrant Japanese who had refused our every generous offer to surrender. And they were wasting time. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And so we were forced to drop these nuclear bombs. When you ask for proof as to why we were forced to drop the A-bombs because of the supposed Japanese resistance to surrender, right? We were told because if we had to invade Japan, it would cost us 500,000 to 1 million casualties. That's the number it was estimated by Truman's advisors. Well, so I asked one question, I got an answer that deflected me to another place. And I asked another question, and that deflected me to another place. Any of you people out there good at this stuff, you know what I'm talking about. We're being lied to. We're being misdirected systematically in order to pass up a certain question that we should be asking and we're not. You know, Officer Barb Brady, move along people, nothing to see here. Oh, there is something to see here, because there is something to see here. My question is, why did we need to invade Japan at all? Here's the story. Mark Felton, who's a very respected, and I am one of the people who respects him, military historian who has 2 YouTube channels, and I heartily recommend them to anyone who's interested in World War II history. Mark Felton just posted a video, and his video was about this decision in which we were forced to drop 2 nuclear weapons on Japan in order to forestall the otherwise horrible carnage of a physical invasion. So I asked the question, Didn't anybody say, why do we need to invade, sir? Wait a minute. I mean this too. And I have some things to say about that potential invasion that will make it look as though that's just smoke that was thrown up in our face to keep us from asking any real questions. All right? I wrote up about it as a response to Mark's video. But he was going on about how the Japanese, the refusal, was centered around the emperor. Well, the emperor has to have special treatment. The emperor has to be immune from persecution. The emperor. And so I said, wait, this is the same emperor who was fearlessly bullied by his generals and admirals? They acted like his tops and he was their bottom? For real, ask a Japanese. That's the narrative. Who was in no way responsible for the aggression, and now the Japanese people on the edge of widespread starvation suddenly cared what happened to him enough to refuse to surrender and end this horror that they were undergoing. I think the narrative is skewed. The emperor, in my mind, was complicit and should have been tried. He signed every operational order. He had audiences with the generals and admirals that explained to him what they were going to do, and he signed off on it or objected and they changed their minds. This is in the record. Why anybody seems to push this narrative that he had no command over this is beyond me, unless they're trying to hide the truth from you. Because it's right there in the record. The emperor is very alert and very smart and exercised command at his meetings. But they say, no, he was the bottom, we were the top. The Japanese, the great masters of dissemination. There's something to learn there. Ask yourself why the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was spared Curtis LeMay's gentle nighttime low-level incendiary attacks that ruined so much of Japan. Let's ask ourselves the concomitant question. Knowing that Tokyo was spared, how was Berlin treated? How was Rome treated? I think the data needs it reinterpreted for what was really going on. We obviously thought the emperor was a major player, or we would have bombed him back to the Jomon age. That's Jomon with a J. Look it up. It's an interesting story. I think we already had plans to use the Japanese reconstruction as a bulwark against possible Soviet aggression and expansion into the South China Sea in future and beyond. Australia. We never want to let Australia fall, right? New Zealand? No, these guys they're as important as we are strategically. Really, how did the U.S. view its own Japanese? It didn't scruple against putting them in prison camps and stealing all their goods and all their lands and never giving them back, ever. So why should scruple against bombing the emperor back to the Stone Age? What were the Japanese going to do? Get madder at you than bomb Pearl Harbor? Then starve your prisoners and beat them and behead them? How are they going to get madder? That sounds like what a coward thinks a bully's going to do in school. So he buckles. Is that the kind of people we were? I don't think so. So that's the narrative. Does not bear scrutiny. And that's an important part about a good narrative, is it should bear scrutiny. And we should have the best. We should have the best writers. They should have gone to me. So, why, in light of these presentations and the official narrative about the need to drop nukes or else we'd have to invade, then please give me the rationale for why we had to invade. Japan was starving. Now, read the Strategic Bombing Survey. I have. It's pages and pages and pages of figures and conclusions and postulates about the air war on Japan. It's fascinating reading if you're interested in the real nitty-gritty history of things, because you will discover that Japan had no oil, had no gasoline, so there were going to be no kamikaze planes, no kamikaze boats, no final sorties by any battleships. She was done. She couldn't even produce bullets anymore. She didn't have the brass. Yeah. So what she had a shrinking market. She was going to be unable, she already was unable to feed her people because we had bombed all the rail lines, and so you couldn't bring produce in. And we had bombed all the rail lines, so you couldn't bring coal to the industries. That meant all of Japan's war industry had no way to turn its machines because it was all coal powered. Yeah, that's how you make electricity. You burn coal, you make steam out of it, and you. Okay. So Japan had zero oil, and she couldn't move coal, so she had zero industry. Zero. I don't mean 10%. I mean zero industry. So Japan had no ability to produce any war material. She had no ability to transport troops anywhere, and except on foot through Japan, which is some of the most mountainous terrain around. She had no way to defend herself. Zero. And most of her best men, the men that could bear arms, the men that had arms and a few cannons and some out-of-gas tanks, well, they were in China in the Kwantung Army, in the armies of occupation. They weren't coming home anytime soon because if you read the Strategic Bombing Survey, the Japanese had no transports. They couldn't bring the men home. If we had gone home to America and Great Britain, if we just left, the Japanese still couldn't have brought their troops home. They didn't have the shipping. They couldn't get the shipping. So this is the nation we're talking about. We were so scared she was going to kill 500,000 to 1 million of our people. When we invaded France in 1944, the Germans were far better prepared, far more organized, and their infrastructure was still in pretty good shape. In 1945, the Japanese were in the opposite condition. They didn't have organized troops. Everything was broken into pieces. Their whole industry was destroyed, disrupted. Firebombing had killed 1 million women and children. I'm not kidding. So yeah, we're really good at that. We claim that we're the good guys, but you got to read the history, see what's going on here. Why do I say it was women and children? Well, it was women and children and old people. Because where were the men again? Where were the military-aged men that were willing to fight? They were in China. They weren't in Japan. So we were bombing women and children, working women and children, and old people, working old people. That was pretty much who was in the residential areas that we bombed. So we bombed a lot of those. So why was Tokyo spared? Why was Japan going to be invaded? She had no way to resist us. And we're afraid that she's going to kill so many people. More people than Germany did when they were far better organized against us. And we were far weaker than we were for the Japanese invasion. See what I mean? Then we were weak and Germany was strong and Germany couldn't stop us and we beat the shit out of them, pardon my language. And now, in Japan, we're strong and they're weak and we're sure they're going to beat the crap out of us. Okay? This is the narrative leads me to this ineluctable conclusion, right? That we were afraid that unarmed Japanese that didn't have any weapons other than spears and bows, and women and children and old people, mostly, were going to resist us to the point where we had to be afraid to walk on Japanese native soil. You don't think that fed Japan's narrative far better than it fed ours? That makes the Japanese feel pretty good, doesn't it? Yeah, them big white guys are scared of us. Scared of our women and children because we didn't have anything to stop them with. We didn't have anything to stop them with. The Japanese had nothing to stop us with. Every time anybody says kamikazes, they have to stop because there was no gasoline. Every time they say kamikaze ship, there was no oil. There was no diesel. Every time they say, well, these people are going to hole up, there was no food. Japan was dead. It was dying. The only way to support it was to invade and give it stuff. And I'll tell you the truth. Well, I'll explain what I think here. So, I think there were zero reasons for any invasion of Japan unless you were going to try the emperor as a war criminal. Nothing else could possibly be a high enough profile target to make it worth your while. Look at all the money you're going to spend. For what? To beat up a bunch of starving women and children? We could do that at home. We're people of color. So, I think the data needs reevaluated and to be free of fanboy blinders. I'm currently working on this treatise, blockaded, out of fuel needed for those kamikaze attacks everyone preferred or pretended to fear, out of coal for industry because we bombed all the rail lines, unable to move food to the cities, and I cite one of the great aces, Saburo Sakai. His story, Zero, makes a very good reading. I think it goes written by Martin Caden or something. Anyway, he says his wife starved to death in the aftermath because nobody could move food to the cities because all the rails were dead and all the trucks were blown up and there was no gas. See what I mean? So yeah, that was the Japan that we thought we had to nuke because otherwise they'd take too many people out, all these starving women and children. And wait, the top people knew this. We weren't stupid. They weren't stupid. So, okay, here we are. So why exactly did we need to do anything else but let Japan wither on the vine? And as just taking that, say we were going to invade, take that bogeyman of casualties. As I pointed out, the Germans were better able to resist us in 1944 than the Japanese were in 1945. And we were far stronger in 1945 than we had been in 1944. The German weapons were better. Really. Their training was better. Their expertise was greater. We beat the crap out of them. And we weren't going to beat the crap out of Japanese. I can't figure out why we thought that. So anyway... Why do historians so fear depleted Japan's power to resist us when all the military-aged men were in China and soon to go into the Soviet bag? That means to be taken prisoner. And what was Japan going to resist us with? All our best people knew this. But the narrative ignores it, conveniently. Do you ever hear that mentioned in the narrative? No. The history is we had to drop the nukes. Somewhere between the Japanese wouldn't surrender and we had to drop the nukes. You missed this whole piece about, well, why did we have to invade? That we're going to have to drop the nukes to keep them from invading, to keep us from invading. There's no reason. Absolutely zero. Because the only reason I could think of is we were going to hold the emperor responsible and have a public trial and execution. Yeehaw, right? Because we didn't get to do it with Mussolini, we didn't get to do it with Hitler. That's unfair, don't you think? I mean, Hitler would have done it with Churchill, don't you think? So, anyway, we did it with all the big Nazis, but suddenly, here we are. And the Japanese put up scapegoats, and we killed them. General Yamashita, and some others, who weren't necessarily bad men, were held up, and they were excoriated, and they were hung. And Tojo, a couple of those people, but the princes that they formed the cabinets around that were arguing for war were completely sacrosanct. The entire imperial family got away with murder. Literal, the murder of millions of people. Oh, well, anyway. So here we go. Just leave them rot and come back in 10 years. In the meantime, keep up a low-level warship blockade to keep their fuel and their oil from reaching the home islands. No incredible expense, no casualty counts, and Japan starves as it throws our airdropped food and medicines on their bonfire Bushido vanities. Perfect fitting end for a warrior culture, don't you think? Just what we wanted for them. What changed? The narrative. And let's address the Soviets now, our fear, because some people say, oh, because the Soviets were going to invade Japan, we had to run there. Mark even said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be disparaging. Mark even said that they were planning on invading on the 18th of August, like very shortly after we dropped the bombs. I'm going to ask you, Mark, you're an expert on this. How many transports did the Soviets have? How many? Go ahead. How many transports? How long had their ports that could maintain transports been bombed by the Germans? 4 years. The Soviets didn't have a big transport fleet before, and they didn't have any transport fleet after. How are they going to move 1 million troops? One ship at a time? 2? So no. The Soviets weren't going to invade Japan unless we took them there, because no one else had the ships. So, again, how many Liberty ships did the Soviets have? 1 million? 2 million? None. How about a dozen after Germany bombed most of the ports for 3 years? No army of occupation was coming from Soviet sources unless we transport. So those are my objections to the official narrative. And I'm sure I'll get rebuttals if anybody's interested enough to watch. However, my points are quite reasonable. I'm not making any leaps of judgment or faith. I'm not being a fanboy, which it seems everybody else is a fanboy. They say the emperor was a criminal. No, no, no. Well, you people who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, right? The Japanese are the master disseminators. They still are today. They were back then. That's how the Yakuza can work with the government, and somehow that all fits. At any rate, I had a point to make and I forgot. But anyway, you guys, there it is. Oh, I meant the Japanese are master disseminators. And what's the great point of dissemination in Japanese history? All of Japanese history. All of Japanese history since the Jomon with a J, look it up. Is the emperor in charge? Or is he merely a figurehead? And the shogun's in charge. The Seitai shogun, the barbarian stomping general. Ha ha ha. And the narrative, the official Japanese narrative was the Seitai shogun, Tojo, military prime minister, even though they ignore that he wasn't in the cabinet that declared war on the United States, you know. But at any rate, the people that built up for Japanese war were cabinets headed by a prince of the imperial family. So the imperial family was always with the military faction. Always. The emperor himself dressed in military clothes because he was a member of the military faction. He wanted the war. He was very much a part of the war, despite the official narrative. This is what's disturbing to me, is that we so much ignore this, and we prove it by saying things that don't hang together, like, well, we had to invade Japan. Well, why do we have to invade Japan unless you were planning on holding the emperor as a war criminal? Yeah, we weren't going to do anything if we invaded Japan except spend more money. All we had to do is keep up a very low-level blockade. Because the Japanese didn't have any ships. And let me tell you, 100 junks ain't going to smuggle much fuel for kamikaze planes. 100 junks will smuggle enough for one kamikaze sortie mission. It ain't getting far. We have radar pickets all over the place. So, that's my point. I know I'm running on, I'm sorry. But it's a very, very strong matter in my interest. And I think that it has been severely misinterpreted again and again, to the point where nobody questions it. Just the same as nobody questioned that Pluto was a planet for so many years. Wow, Bill.